Okay, so we're going to start in today. It's a little bit of a different day from our traditional Rhino modeling days because we're going to go back into V-Ray for a while. But today we're specifically going to deal a lot with materials and kind of the makeup of what makes a good material or what makes a material to begin with. Because the more you understand about materials, the better you're going to be at making some adjustments, some tweaks, and really making the materials appear realistic. The other factor in this is that you're going to end up wanting to either have or make a material that isn't part of the big package of materials that I gave you. Now, I tried to cover the basics, concrete, steel, all the stuff I think you're going to use is going to be there, but there's always going to be this outlier that, oh, I really want, some kind of, translucent whatever or something. And so if we really understand how materials work and what makes up a V-Ray material, we'll have a much better understanding of how to make adjustments to the settings and make it look correct. So today's going to be all about materials and much less about modeling. I'm also going to split today's lecture, and you see in the handout for 210 that there's, under part 2, there's 2 parts. There's people that have taken 135 before, and there's people that have never taken 135 before in this class. I would like to show you, for those of you that have taken 135 before, I'd like to show you the full process of building a material completely from scratch as if you never have done it. But you need a certain base knowledge of Photoshop to be able to do that in the first place. So if you've never taken 135, it doesn't matter. We'll just kind of gloss over that for you, and then I'll come back at the end and I'll show you creating something from scratch. But if I don't show you creating something from scratch, those of you that have taken 135 or are comfortable in Photoshop lose out on the ability to do that if you really need to. So we're going to do the short version first, and then I'll go back and go off on a tangent so that the people that didn't take 135 or took it with somebody else don't necessarily have to follow me. But that's the best way I can do it in the class because Photoshop isn't a requirement as part of this particular class. So we're also going to flip back and forth between some graphics that I prepared ahead of time and then kind of how the materials work. The one other thing I want to do before we get into lecture today is to remind you that your assignment 201 is due 1 week from today. So I know I gave it to you a long time ago. That is the table and the chair. Remember, you don't have to include lots of chairs. It's just one table and one chair. And the definition of what is a table and what is a chair is rather loose. And you can see from the examples that people have done before. What I'm looking for is good modeling. So how you created it in Rhino, does it look good? Okay, no weird errors or anything like that. And did you apply textures correctly and or have texture mapping applied correctly? So are the textures in scale? Do the textures go in the right direction? That kind of stuff.
When is it due?
Make sense? 1 week from today. So the 7th of March. Right? Happy leap year, by the way. Anyway, I always thought it'd be really cool to have a birthday on a leap year. I think that would be really fun. Like you have this like super party once every 4 years or something. I don't know. Anyway.
Have an excuse for being childish.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, I'm only 4. Anyway. So assignment 201 is due 1 week from today. So let's start by talking a little bit about what makes up a material. And if you go to today, we're going to need a few files that are available on the course website. Oops, this is supposed to be the live version here. Sorry, I was making last-minute edits to things. And if you go to today, I have a prepped file for you that's called materialstest.3dm. That's a Rhino file that will let you play with these materials. I already have one that's on my flash drive, so I can go ahead and just open that one. I don't need to download a fresh one. But you guys will want to...
That's on that right there?
That is on the exercise 210 page for today.
So exercises?
Yeah, it's under exercises.
Oh.
And I'm going to go ahead and open... my version here. It's going to look something like this. You've seen this little object before, but no reason for you to have to create it. I wanted an object that already has the lighting and everything is all set up for you. All you have to worry about is applying the materials, which lets us really work with the V-Ray material editor and start to kind of evaluate what's going on in various materials. So I'm going to do this as a way of kind of illustrating what's happening, and then I'll go back and show you how to kind of build it. But we need to start with a pre-made material so we can analyze what's really happening in this particular material. So the material that I'm going to load is a shingle siding material. It's available inside the package of V-Ray materials that you've downloaded. It's under siding, wood, cedar shingle siding, if you want to follow along. And so I was able to load that. We can see the little preview there of what it looks like. So there are a variety of components that make up a material file. And so this is where I was telling you I was going to jump in and out of some various graphics for you. Let's see if we can zoom in a little bit, make this a little bigger. OK, so in this particular example, right, we have a couple different things that make up the material. We have an image file. That's the one on top, right here, that looks like a set of shingles. Okay, somebody went out, they took a photograph of the shingles, they did a little bit of post-processing in Photoshop, and they made it so that that will tile one after the other after the other. So as we apply it to our material, it'll keep going, so it doesn't have seams in it. Okay, so that's an image file. Below that, we have something that's called a bump map. And the bump map is a black and white image file, and I'm going to show you what each one of these are in just a second, that controls very small texture. Right? So it's the grain of the wood. It's little tiny imperfections in the surface of the material. Okay? Below that, we have something that's called a displacement map, which is a lot like a bump map, but it's for bigger displacement. So if we were looking at this particular example, the bump map would have the little wood grain. So if we were looking at like a cross-section of this shingle, right, we'd have the shingle, here's a shingle, and it would have little imperfections in the grain or something like that that represent the shingle instead of being flat. Make sense? When we get to the displacement map, the third one down, and you can kind of see it from the side, that's what controls the fact that the shingles go down and then over and then down and then over. So it's big jumps in depth, not just single jumps in depth. And when we combine all three of them together, we get what looks like realistic shingles. They have depth to them. So the advantage of doing this in a material is that we didn't sit down and actually model like the shingles. Right? We didn't, when we created our surface, we didn't say, oh, I want it to be a shingle, so let me build a surface, and then I'll build another surface like that, right? And then I'll build another surface like that. And I had to create all this geometry. Instead, I just created a flat surface in Rhino. And then when I apply the material, or V-Ray, does this texture. Right? It pushes the pieces out. So it'll make sense when we do it live here. So let me jump over into Rhino, and I'm going to look at this V-Ray material editor for a second. So under the diffuse tab, right, the capital M means that there's a map assigned to it. This is the diffuse map. So if I were to click on it, right, we can see that this shingle siding, right, what's it called? Shingle_diff.jpg is my bitmap image. Looks like this. Right? If I went to my flash drive here, let me just open a new one here, and I went into my resources folder, siding. Okay, so here is my shingles_diff file, right? Just the image file that looks like the shingles. Okay, nothing else. If I move over back into Rhino, we'll say OK for right now. That's my image file. And we come down here under the map section. I have a bump map and a displacement map with a check next to each, and a button with a capital M, which again means that there's a map assigned to it. Right? If you see a lowercase m, like here under transparency map, there's no map assigned to it. Okay? So let's look at the bump map. If I were to click on the map here for bump map, I have something called shingles_bump.jpg. If I were to preview it, it's kind of a black and white image that represents texture. And if I were to look at the my flash drive here, let's see if I can pull it back up. Right? Here's my bump. Right? So black and white. It's supposed to be kind of a high contrast black and white image, so that if we were to zoom in here, right, you can see that there's kind of the wood grain is coming out. It's not the best quality preview here. But you see how there's just a little bit of black and white, and that represents the surface texture. In my Rhino file, right, there it is, I'll say OK. In my Rhino file, I have the bump set to 0.5 here. These units are not related directly to the units that are in the scene. This is not a ½ inch, right? Well, it is in the case of displacement map. This is just a value. And so if you start at 1, if you see something, that's good. If you don't see it, just increase the value, right? Somewhere in this 0.5 to 1 to 2 is probably reasonable. If you increase it to 10 or 100, you'll probably see more of it, but it's probably going to be a little bit too large. Okay? Displacement map, on the other hand, much like bump map, does the same sort of thing, but it's going to be a little bit different. So this is shingles_displacement.jpg, and if I look at it, right, it's very, very different. Right? It doesn't have the small scale textures. It's smooth gradients. So if I look here at the actual file, right, in this case it's backwards. I mix up which one's black and which one's white, so a lot of times you just check the box for inverse. Anyway, so in this particular instance, I should have inverted it. It should be white to black instead of black to white, but like I said, it doesn't really matter. In a gradient like this, the black edge is one level and the white edge is another level. And so if I go gradient, it's going to be a smooth curve between the two. Right? So in this instance, we start at the thickest point and we go all the way up under this shingle to the thinnest point. Right? If we have a strong contrast, say between this, which is black, and this, which is kind of white, it's going to be a step rather than a smooth transition. So in this particular case, we're looking at what represents the individual tipped shingles that are all put together. So when we add this into the equation, under this displacement map here, right there, this value is the difference in whatever our default units are, so in my case it's inches, between black and white on that file. So if I say this is a ½ inch, 0.5, that means each one of these shingles is going to be a ½ inch in its value. Okay? So this is where paying attention to units really makes a difference. If you do your model in millimeters or you do your model in feet, right, when you go to use one of these materials, you're going to have these giant jumps, right, or really small jumps, because the default units on this material are assuming you're going to be using inches, which is why I always say large object inches as your template when you're creating stuff. Okay? So be aware. So let's look at how these come together. I'm going to go ahead and apply these onto these two objects. And I'm just going to go straight on to the selection. So I'll apply material to selection. And I'm going to uncheck for the moment bump and displacement and leave just the color diffuse map. And we'll go ahead and we'll render it. So you see the texture mapping's already been applied, so it's really set up for you to just learn about the materials, not about the modeling today. Okay, and so we ended up with a reasonable looking shingle texture. Let me actually zoom in on this corner here. Hold on a second. Maybe like that, and we'll go ahead and render this one more time. Good news is it's going to render fairly fast. Okay, so we see, especially along the edge, that this is just it's a photograph applied to a surface. Okay? So if we look on the edges, there's nothing that sticks up. It's just perfectly flat. It can be a little bit of an optical illusion because obviously the photograph makes it look like the shingles stand up, but they don't stand up in this case. Okay? So let's go back into my material editor. Oops, sorry, that was the options. Material editor. And I'm going to turn back on my bump map. And I'm going to increase the value from 0.5 to, say, 10 as a way of kind of previewing what happens. And you can actually see the preview here if you do it live. You can see the grain kind of come out. So let's go ahead and let's render this with that on. So, and again, I tried to exaggerate it so on the screen you guys can see this a little bit more. There's a reason I set it at 0.5 to begin with, because that's the right amount. But if we look at this, what used to be just a flat surface now has all of these little pits and grooves that are in it as a result of that bump map on the particular texture. Now in this case it's probably too much, but this actually works in V-Ray to cast shadows. There's a reason that the little bumps cast little shadows and there's darker and lighter patches. It's part of what makes a material look realistic in V-Ray. So let's go back, but again here the bump map doesn't change the edge. The edge is still flat. Okay, so it's just little texture in the middle here. If we go back to our material editor, and I'm going to tone this down for right now because we don't need it that high anymore, and I'm going to turn on the displacement map at 0.5, right? And we'll go ahead and we'll render it again. Notice that the rendering now slowed down, right? It's not quite as snappy. That's because this takes a lot more calculation power from V-Ray to actually do this rendering. So one of the things that happens when you're modeling, let's say at the end of the semester and you're doing your final renderings, a lot of the materials you use will have these displacement maps assigned to them. Well, if you're rendering from too far away and you can't really see the fact that this texture exists and you can get away with just the photograph, you can turn off the displacement map and your render will be significantly faster. So you have to kind of weigh how close you are in what you're trying to do. So here we are finishing up, and you look at that edge, which used to be perfectly flat, right, now has the shingle siding texture on it. You see that jump? Okay? So that's what we were looking for. So it's the combination of those files that make up the V-Ray material that make it realistic, that give it this in and out texture such that it looks like an actual material. Make sense so far? Okay? So let's do another material, another example of this kind of a thing. So I'm going to do a corrugated metal material, I hope. Okay? So you guys have seen this before, right? This is your typical like galvanized wavy. You go to Home Depot, you see it, it's on the top of a roof, that kind of thing, right? We have this corrugated metal material. So in this case, we have the photograph of what the corrugated metal looks like, right up there. Then we have underneath that would be the bump map, which would be whatever the texture is on the surface, which is pretty, I mean, this metal's pretty smooth, so there's not that much that we can do to it. So if you look at it, there's not that much applied to it. I might even leave it off altogether because I don't know how much value it really adds. Okay? We move down to the displacement map, right, which is this one. That's where we add the waviness to it. So we have a flat surface in Rhino, but it turns into this wavy surface. Okay? And then when we combine them all together, we get what looks like the corrugated metal that we were looking for. Okay? So, as a challenge question, what does this look like? Right? Yeah, but in the black and white form, right? The actual map that's making this. Right? It's going to be gradients that go from black to white to black to white to black to white. Okay? So I'll go pull these up so you can actually see them. So it takes a little bit to conceptually get used to what these are really doing. So let's look at this same corrugated material. Let me go ahead and load that up. Exactly. Or vice versa. I forget which way it is. I think it says on your handout which way it is. It does. I'm going to show you in a second where the invert button is, because if you make it backwards, you just click the invert button and it makes no difference. Okay, so let me go ahead and import material. Let me load material. And I forget, in all honesty, where I put this. There it is. All right, so there it is. And if we look at it again, over here, under our diffuse map, if we were to preview it, we have the colored image of what that corrugated metal looks like. Okay. Then down here under the bump map, there's a file that represents the bump. Right? Looks like I did include it. It has a little bit on it. And then we also have a file that represents the displacement map. And so here is what I was talking about. So we end up with a black and white with just a gradient that goes from black to white to black to white that represents that. If instead I did black and white without the gradient, it would be steps. Right? It would be folded steps like this rather than the smooth curve. So let's take a look at what that looks like on the actual object. So let me right click and say apply material to selection. Again, I'm going to turn off the bump and the displacement, and we'll do the first render and have a look at what it looks like. Okay, so there's my corrugated metal. Looks like I didn't apply it to up here, but so what? Okay, so there it is without anything. If I come back to my material editor and I turn on the bump map, and again, 0.1, that's very little. It's almost not worth putting on in the first place. Let's change that. Oh, thanks, V-Ray. All right, here we go. Let's change that to maybe 10. Let's see if we can see anything in it. I'll go ahead and render. And obviously I exaggerated beyond what is reasonable. So there we go. You can kind of see that it has kind of a speckled texture to it, right? A little bit. Metal is not this rough to begin with, unless it was really old and pitted or something. But in which case, corrugated steel would have rusted away, and it wouldn't be there. So. Yeah, so you could do aluminum. You could do. I mean, this could be a vinyl siding. I mean, the point is you could make almost anything with this combination of tools. So anyway, let me turn off that bump because obviously it's pretty ugly. Oops. Material editor. Let's go back to 0.1. And then I'll turn on the displacement map, which is again about the wave. Now in this case, I've selected the displacement map to be at 1, which means the difference between black and white is 1 inch, which means the height of the corrugation is going to be 1 inch. So now, if I were to render it, again, major slowdown when I go to do this. That has to do with the texture mapping. So I can change the horizontal, but it's different setting. So it's how the mapping is actually applied. And so in this particular case, we can see along this edge, it hasn't finished rendering yet, my depth of these corrugations is probably too much for the texture mapping that's been applied to the object. See how they kind of spike out almost here, and they're too much? So in this particular context, because this object is so close together, I really need to change that to be less than 1. But you can still get a pretty good sense for the fact that it's going in and going out. Okay? So I'd come back into my material editor, and instead of 1, maybe I'd do it at 0.5, right, or 0.35, something like that. And again, all of this is a little bit of experimentation to what really looks right in your particular image. And the scale of this object was just so small that I really kind of needed to change that a little bit. And we'll see this time it'll probably look a little bit better. The other option would have been to keep that setting at 1 and change the texture mapping so that it didn't apply as densely on this particular object. There you go. That feels a little bit better, right, in terms of the wave pattern, etc. So you have to kind of play around with that. So that's another good example of kind of how this texture mapping works. So what about if we have something that's like a mesh or something with some transparency? So thus far we've talked about diffuse map, bump map, and displacement map. What about if there's something with some transparency to it? So let's move to something like this. That's a wire mesh, and we want to create this wire mesh example. So in this context, we have our original image that represents the wire mesh. Then we have our bump or our displacement map or both. In this case, I'm just using a bump map or a displacement map, not a bump. I just skipped the bump altogether. It's a relatively smooth surface, so I skipped it. This is just the displacement map. Then I have something called a transparency map that includes what's see-through and what's not. And then I have the final combination of the materials together. Okay? Now, one of the things to be aware of on something like this is in a mesh, in this particular example, right, when I create the bump or the transparency map, right, it's going to say, let's say that, I'm trying to think of what's the best way to explain it here. Okay, so if I have a bump map and I had this particular section is black and it gradients to white and then it goes back to black to represent that, which is what I created in the last one. When I cut through, right, so let's say I had another one here that went like this and then went like this, the black, and I had this, right? When I cut through, right, this is then a hole in my wire. I don't have this. I only have this side. So it's a one-sided. If I was looking at this side, it would actually be the opposite of that. Does that kind of make sense? I'd be looking into the concave, as opposed to the normal cross-section of wire would be more like that. Does that kind of make sense? So you just have to be aware of what it does to your overall piece. It doesn't really matter, but it's worth pointing out. Okay, so let's look at this in its Rhino context. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my material editor again, and I'm going to load up that wire mesh. And I think it's under metal, metal screens, yellow plastic coated. Here it is. All right, and so let's go ahead and apply this to both objects. I messed up last time. I'll apply material to selection. Here we go. So now, if we look at it, okay, this has a little bit of reflection. We'll talk about that in just a second. But here under diffuse, right, I have my diffuse map. So if I click on it, there it is. Notice that the diffuse map does have a color background behind the mesh. It doesn't matter because it's going to get cut out. There it is. But next to diffuse, I have transparency. And where before this was a little m, it's now a big M, which means it has a transparency map applied. So if I were to click on that and click preview, I'd end up with a black and white image where in this case the white squares are getting cut out, the black squares or the black stuff stays. Okay? If it's a gradient, if it's somewhere in gray, it becomes semi-transparent. So if you wanted it to be kind of semi-transparent to fully transparent and back, you could do that with a gradient. Generally speaking, transparency maps are black and white because it's just cut out or not cut out, generally. So I now have the transparency map, or excuse me, the transparency map and the diffuse map. And then down here, it looks like I'm doing a bump map rather than displacement map in this case. Let's go ahead and look at the bump map, right, which is like this. It has a little bit of a, the black is what's getting cut out, and then it has a little bit of a fuzz around it. So let's look at what it looks like without the bump map and without the transparency map for a second. Notice that it's really easy to turn off the bump and displacement, much harder to turn off the transparency map. It's because generally you don't turn off the transparency map, but sometimes when you're rendering you would like to turn off to speed up the rendering, the bump and the displacement. So let's go ahead and have a look. So here's the image with just the diffuse map applied. Right? So obviously it's solid. We can't see through it. I'm not going to let it finish. We'll come over and we'll turn on the transparency map. Okay. And we'll go ahead and render again. All right. Okay, so now in this instance, I told you I'd get to where if it was backwards we could correct it. In this instance, it looks like I kept the middle squares, not the wire. So I made a mistake. So if I go back to my material editor and I go back to my transparency map here and I check the box right here for invert. It's in the second little section down under texture manipulation, invert, check. And I say OK. Now when I render, I'll keep the mesh and lose the holes. It'll be the opposite. There we go. So we'll let this one finish so we can take a look at it. So transparency map, again, slows down the rendering time because we have to calculate going through. Right? So in this context, light can pass through each of these into the backside of, say, this piece. Also down here in the shadow, once we get there, we'll have patches of light that go all the way through that aren't blocked. So this really does add a lot to the V-Ray engine and how much time it takes to calculate shadows and whatever because it has those layers of transparency in them. So there you go. You can see down here all the little squares of light coming through, passing through that mesh. So let me go ahead and close this for now. I'm going to go back to my material editor, and I'm going to turn on my bump map. And so we get just a little bit of puffing around these. And then I can do my final rendering in this context, and we'll see a little bit more of a rounded cross-section. So we'll let that render in the background. So I wanted to kind of walk through how these things apply together before we actually start building materials from scratch. Okay? So what I'm going to do now is, for those of you, I'm going to do part 2A. So this is for people who never took 135 or are uncomfortable in Photoshop. And for those of you that did take 135, I'm not going to ask you to do all 4 materials today from scratch. You just pick one if you did 135 for the practice of having to go all the way through it. And so we're going to go to a website. vraymaterials.co.uk is a pretty good one. It's right here. If you are interested in a material that's from another website, that's fine. But we're looking, part of the reason I like this V-Ray Materials, is most of the materials are set for 3D Studio Max, not for Rhino. So we're going to adapt these materials into Rhino. Right? So we're going to use the files that somebody else created and make them Rhino compatible. Okay, so let's have a look here. And depending on what you're interested in, we can have a look. So there's material categories. I don't know, let's pick food. Why not? Right? Honey, it's going to be hard. We'll do the Coke can, sure. All right, so good news is it's free. Let me go ahead and download it now. And it's going to come down as a zip file, so whoever created it packed the file to begin with. Let me go ahead and show in my folder, and I'm going to copy this to my flash drive. And I'll put it into today's folder. Oops, that was not what I wanted it. And let me go ahead and I'm going to paste this there. And then I have to extract it so that I have the pieces. So obviously I'm doing this live. I have no idea what's gonna come out of it. Looks like I have an image file that represents the Coke can, and well, it looks like they're going to give me something that's not usable. So I don't have the right stuff to actually make this one work, so this one was a bad one. Let me pick another one. Let's try... How about the worn factory wall? Let's try this again here. And let me paste this. There's my factory wall. Let me extract that. And there. In this one, I have a diffuse wall texture. Right, there's the factory wall. The hope is that whoever did it will actually make this such that it will tile. It looks to me like it's going to tile. But I can build a material out of this. The files that came with it, the old factory wall file and the sample file, both are unusable because these are 3D Studio material files. So all I'm going to be able to use is the wall texture itself. So let's go back into Rhino, and let's start to work with this a little bit. So I'm going to go and open my material editor, and I'm going to create a brand new material. So I'll right-click on Scene Materials, Create Material, Standard. And so let's rename this to be Old Factory Wall. Okay. All right. So now under Old Factory Wall, I have the same sets of drawers that I've had before. We'll start with the color. Right? Remember, we don't want it to be gray. We want it to actually be the texture. So I'm going to click on the M, and I'm going to load up what's called a text bitmap, which is basically the image file that represents this old factory wall. So then I'll go to my flash drive for today. And I'm going to pick that texture file, and I'll say open. And we can see a little preview of what it looks like here. And I'll go ahead and say OK. And if I were to preview it, we'd get, there it is, the old factory wall. So now I could right-click, and I could apply material to the selection. And then I could go ahead and I could render this material. And this would look like the old factory wall. Okay? Now, in this context, the file that I downloaded didn't come with a bump map or anything for me to work with. So I can't really push it beyond just this one view, right? That is the old factory wall material. So it's just going to look like this. This is as far as I can push this particular one. So let's go ahead and pick a different one, and I'll see if I can pull it farther. Part of the challenge here is I'm picking these at random, and I don't necessarily know what different ones have come with. Let's see what the blue asphalt comes with. And before I get too far, okay, so this one, we get reflection, we get displacement, and we get diffuse. So this is probably a good one. So we'll do the blue asphalt. Okay? So let me go ahead and take all of these, and again, I'm going to copy them over to my flash drive into today's folder. And then I'll extract it. All right, so now we can have a look. So the diffuse here is this blue image that would be the painted asphalt. Okay? And theoretically, it would tile in all directions. We're going to assume that for just a second. The displacement map here, right, is that black and white high contrast image. To me, I would have it a little bit more high contrast than this is. But this is essentially going to represent the texture of what sticks out and what doesn't stick out in this particular material. And it looks like they also included something called a reflection map, which is a slightly blurry version of the bump map. And we'll add that one in as well. Okay? So we have those. And then obviously we have the stuff. This looks like this was a Maya material file, not a Rhino file. So again, we're adapting. So let me go ahead and jump back into Rhino, and we'll create this material. So I'll go to my material editor. I'm going to right-click and say Create Material, Standard. And this is going to be blue asphalt. Actually, I'm going to call it asphalt blue. And the reason I would do it in that order is then if I had asphalt gray or asphalt black or whatever, I could distinguish all the asphalts would be grouped together. It just makes more sense to me. So I'll go ahead and name it asphalt blue. And then we're going to come up here, and again, under the diffuse color, we're going to click on the M, and we're going to load a text bitmap that is the diffuse version. So we'll go ahead and say open, and there it is. Maps are essentially JPEG files. So we'll go ahead and say OK, and I'm going to apply this to my selection, and then we can do a render. We now have the blue painted asphalt. Okay? But I'd like there to be a little bit more texture, because if we were to zoom in and render, this would be just perfectly flat, right, with no actual texture. There it is. Right? It can be very deceptive. It looks like there's a little bit of texture in here, but there really isn't because we haven't assigned it yet. OK, so now I'm going to turn on, I'm going to check the box for bump here, and I'm going to click on the M. And once again, I'm going to go to text bitmap, and I'll pick the displacement map. Right? Look, they call it displacement. Displacement and bump a lot of times are very, very close to being the same thing. I'll go ahead and do it as a displacement map instead. That's fine. We'll uncheck displacement, or we'll uncheck bump. We'll turn on displacement. Same value here. We're going to go to text bitmap displacement. There it is. We'll go ahead and say OK. And remember, this value is in inches. So if the difference between white and black in this was an inch, we'd have really spiky asphalt, right? Probably not realistic. So maybe, you know, an eighth of an inch, 0.125, something like that seems a little bit more reasonable. And now we can go ahead and render and see what it looks like. And again, of course, it's going to take longer while we do this. But I am going to let it actually go so we can see what the end result is.
Not
so
compatible with Rhino.
No. So in this case, looks like I still made it a little bit too big, right, in my difference here. So it kind of looks like furry carpet or something. Probably not what I wanted. So in this particular context, at this scale, I probably would just turn it off because it doesn't seem to be worth it. But if I changed my texture mapping and was doing a street rather than a little object that was 2 inches by 2 inches or whatever, this might be the right setting. So you have to adjust these based on the, the overall scale of your object. It's kind of cool in its own way, but I'd have to measure it again. Anyway, so in this particular context, probably not the right setting, but you get the idea of where that would be. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that off for right now. And in this file, we also had something called a reflection map, right? Which means that the person who created the file thought this asphalt should have a little bit of reflection to it. Okay? Maybe it would be like having a little bit of rain on it or a little bit of water on it and reflect a little bit. So we can do that as well, should we want to. So I'm going to right-click on where it says Asphalt Blue. I'm going to create a layer, and it's going to be a reflection layer. Okay? And we see that above Diffuse, I get a drawer called Reflection. There it is. And under Reflection, under this map, right, I have a Fresnel reflection on it. This index of refraction represents the kind of the type of material it is and how it reflects. So there's going to be different values depending on what you're trying to create. So like a value for ice is 1 point something. It's like 1.01. A value for a diamond is 2. And you can actually do a Google search for your particular material. Now, wet asphalt probably isn't going to have an index of refraction, but we're going to try it anyway. And complete index of refraction list.
Yeah.
Right? And so depending on your material, it is.
And the A is like out
I know, but oh yeah, look at that, 1.635. All right, so how cool, right? So this looks like a great site. Might want to save this information. So 1.635. So we're going to jump back into Rhino. Thank you guys for finding that. And I'm going to change this IOR to 1.635, right? And I'm going to say OK. Now, there is a way to actually control such that the surface has reflection on it and the underneath stuff doesn't have reflection on it. It's getting a little too technical for right now, but we could drop another map on top of the highlight and the reflections here, and that could control it. For right now, it doesn't really matter. The only time that this might be a little bit tricky is if you're trying to do something that's highly reflective that's a mesh, because you have to mask off the parts that are transparent in the reflection as well. Otherwise, you'll get reflection on the see-through parts. Anyway, but for right now, we'll keep it rather simple, and we can actually look at it, and you see that we're getting reflection off of it. Okay? Now, I'm going to go ahead and render it, and we'll take a look. And the truth is that it may be too reflective. Right? This might be as if it were completely slick wet, and we need it to be a little bit less than that. In which case, I could come in here and I could adjust this highlight value down, or I could adjust the reflection down. And you can kind of see a live preview if it'll let me do that. Let's do this at 0.5. And we can see that it's not quite as bright. The reflection at 0.5, right, much less. So you have to decide what's the right value. And sometimes the preview is a really easy way of doing that. Something like that seems more right. I don't have quite the sharp. I'm getting a reflection off of, but it's not the sharp square anymore. So something like that might seem like a pretty good result. Once I have the material done, I'm going to right-click on the material, and I'm going to go to Pack Material, just like we've done before, and I'm going to save this as a whole zip file of my material. Right? That's what you're ultimately going to post today, with the rendered version of this as your sample image. Okay? But we're going to come back to that in a little bit. What I'm going to do now, and this is what I told all of you, for those of you that it took 135, I'm going to show you creating the material completely from scratch, right, with nothing, and how you create the various files that make it up. For those of you that haven't taken 135 or aren't comfortable with Photoshop, what you're going to do today is just rely on one of these sites, like the V-Ray Materials site here, to download other materials and just assemble them such that they're usable. Okay? So let's say that I wanted to create a material entirely from scratch. First thing I need to do is know what material that I want to do. So one of the materials that I've been wanting to do is a calstone paver. Right? So I'm trying to pick something that would be interesting. So maybe I'll do calstone paver, and if calstone doesn't work, maybe I'll pick like a Belgard paver or something instead. So I'm looking to do, let's see here, let's do the quarry stone, all right, something like that. Let's look at colors. Right, see, these are kind of nice preview images. And let's pick, say, that color. Yeah, I like this color. Okay, so let's say I pick that color. Okay, I'm going to right-click and say, I hope I can save this image. I hate it when they do this. Let's do an image search and see if it's somewhere. That one. Let me just see. I want to see if there's any that are larger in size. That one might be better because it's a little bit larger. All right, let's actually add to my search tools here. And let me say at least a large size and see what comes up. Nope, I don't want that. Yeah, that one will probably work. Okay. So let me go ahead, view the image so I can see it as large as it is. I'm going to go ahead and save the image as, and we'll save it to my flash drive into today's folder. I'm going to create a new folder for calstone. And I'm going to go ahead and save this onto my flash drive. So there's the pavers. Now I need to go back into the world of Photoshop and make some adjustments to it. So let me go ahead and open up Photoshop. And this is going to be the refresher course for all of you that took 135 a while ago, right? And I'm going to go ahead and open this file. So let me go to File and then Open. There it is. And I'll go ahead and say Open. Now, obviously, the part at the bottom here that says Sierra Granite, I'm not interested in. So I'll just start by going ahead and cropping that out. So I'm going to come over here to the Crop tool. And I'll pull this up so that that's just gone altogether, because I know I don't want that. So I'm not even looking at that. Okay. Now I need to spend a little bit of time analyzing this image, and I'm going to set some points. The key here is that ultimately I need this image to repeat in multiple directions. And I'm going to use something called the offset filter to do this when I create the repeating pattern. And then I'll have to do a little bit of clone stamping to make it all heal together correctly. And you may remember this from the world of the 135 way back when. All right, so exactly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a few guides to help me out here. And what I'm looking for is for that point and that point to basically match up. And I also want to know where the same point, so if I came down here, where the same point's going to fall. Right? So it doesn't look like I actually have enough data to do anything more than to that row. And it looks like that falls fairly nicely with that area. I'm going to do the same thing on the sides here. And this is more of a guide for myself than anything else. And I need it to fall right there. Okay? So this is helping me kind of discern where can I repeat. So this particular pattern, based on the stones, is going to repeat in that order. So I'll go ahead and I'll crop this image to that particular size. So we'll go there, and we'll go there. If I took an image, and maybe I'll have to go back and do this to show you guys, if it wasn't so perfectly shot flat, I'd have to do a skew to the image to get it to end up being flat. But we'll go with it for right now. And I'll go ahead and say, OK. So now that I have that cropped out, right, the idea here is that my pieces are going to match up when they, yes, they will. Sorry, just looking at it again to make sure. OK, so now I'm going to have a general idea of the image size. I'm going to go to image and then image size so that I can say, OK, it's about 700 by about 500. And now when I go to filter, other, offset, I'm going to do a horizontal and a vertical offset at roughly half the values. So at horizontal, I'm going to do it at like 350 or so, which creates a seam right there. And at vertical, I'm going to do a seam at about 250 there. So the point is that I want something to show up right about there in the center. And you can see that I now have these crosshairs. So if you remember this from 135, it was essentially I took an image that was like this, and I cut it here, and I cut it here. And if this was like this, I took piece 4, and I put it right here. So 4 went there, right? So 4 went there. 3 went to there. 2 went to there, like that. Okay, so I rearranged those pieces, which gives me the 4 seams that I'm seeing here. There, 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 and there. The advantage, though, is the places that I cut automatically match up. So they're going to tile going outward. So anything, as long as what I see looks good, that's all that matters. So I'll go ahead and say OK for right now. And so these stones have a bit of color variation to them anyway, but I'm going to have to make them kind of match up. And I'll use something called the clone stamp tool to do that, which is this tool. It's set on the grass brush still, so we have to get it back to kind of a normal brush here. And what I can do with this is I can copy from a particular region over into another region. So something like that. We can kind of copy that over. This probably needs to come up this way. Such that those start to become one stone. Right? The good news is because these are well, I'm getting rid of that line, which is the idea. I don't want to see that line anymore. Let's take a little bit of this over, like that. That's not too bad. And this one's going to be the hardest because I've got lots of different colors kind of coming together. So let's take, it's similar to this color over here, so I'm going to take this color and copy that color into here. And then we'll take a little bit of this color and kind of fuzz that together. We've got darker coming in here. Let's take that and kind of copy that right into there. Let's take a little bit of this, copy it like that. So you see how I'm kind of working my way into this particular scene. I'm going to take this corner over here and put that corner right there on the stone. And then I'm going to take this crack, and let's take that crack there and see if we can add that right in there like that. We need to get rid of part of this stone, so let's get rid of that part of the stone right like that. So you can see that I can kind of modify things a bit. Let me get back to where I had this corner, kind of like that corner. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, I'm not that happy with this. Let me back that up. Let's take this and kind of continue on with that. And let's see if we can't get. So I'm going to have to keep working on this corner a little bit here. Let's see if we can know what? Let me take this corner. Sorry, sometimes it just takes a few goes to really make this stuff work. I have to think about which piece I'm copying from. All right, well, anyway, I don't want you to have to watch me. We're going to rush through this a little bit more so you don't have to sit here and if I were doing this as a final version, I would take a little bit more time. All right, close enough. Okay? So the idea is that those seams then go away, which makes this a tiling texture when I continue. So I'll go ahead and I'll save this. I'll go to File, Save it as a JPEG in high quality, and let me do a Save As so that I can change the name of it. I'm going to call this Quarry Stone Sierra Granite diff for diffuse, or underscore diffuse, and we'll go ahead and save. So the next piece is I need that texture map. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and create an adjustment layer that's a levels adjustment layer, and I'm also going to create one called the channel mixer because I want to convert it to black and white. So I'm going to do both. Doesn't matter the order. I'll do the channel mixer first, and I'll check the box for monochrome so that it becomes a black and white image. I'm not going to go through and worry too much about the post-processing here to make it look better because ultimately I'm going to go to my adjustment layer and do a levels adjustment. And I'm going to change this so that I get a nice deep dark black as part of the image and a nice bright white as part of the image. Okay, so we're looking for this kind of high contrasty black and white image. So now that that's done, I'll go ahead and I'll save this. I'll go to File, Save As. Oops, sorry. Save As, JPEG. And where's my diffuse? But this one is going to be bump. And I'll click Save. And I'll say OK. So that's there. Now I have that. We'll turn off these for just a second. Now, at this point, I need to spend a little bit more time because I want the cracks to be depressed down a bit. So I have a couple different ways of doing it. I think probably the easiest thing is I'm just going to use this polygonal lasso tool, for lack of a better tool for right now. And I'm just going to kind of draw right along each of these cracks. Sorry, you guys are going to have to bear with me for a second because this is going to take a little bit of time. I know this is thoroughly exhilarating to watch me click. But such is life. And I promise you, I'm going as fast as I can. Getting sloppier the faster I'm going. I know. Okay, so I have that. I need to subtract from the selection a couple stones that were in here that I missed. There's one. There's the next one. But hopefully the process of me sitting here doing this will make you appreciate how this stuff does actually take people time to create good quality materials. Okay? So, oh, right there. Okay, so close enough for right now. So I'm going to use this selection on a brand new layer here, and I'm going to paint in white and black. So we'll start with black. I'll use my paintbrush. We can make it nice and big, and I'm going to paint in the cracks so that all the cracks are in black. Like that. Okay? Then I'll go up to Select, Inverse, and I'll flip my colors, and I'm going to paint in white. Okay? And I'll paint all of this in white. So remember, the last one was that high contrast black and white undulating surface. This is much more about creating the depth. Right? So there it is in black and white. I'll take it one step further. I'll go to Filter, Blur, and then put a Gaussian blur on it, just so that it's not a sharp edge. It actually has a little bit of a round to it, maybe about 3 pixels worth. Yeah, something like that, just so that it rounds down into the crack, maybe 2. Yeah, about like that, something like that. And I'll go ahead and say OK. And then I'll do File, Save As. And we'll save this instead of, let me go to JPEG. And this is going to be the displacement. And I'll go ahead and click Save. So now I have the JPEG. That's going to be the diffuse. I have the bump texture that I created, and I also have the displacement. So let's go in and take a look at it in Rhino. So let me create a new material. It's going to be standard. This one will be Calstone, Sierra, Granite, Paver. Maybe I'll do, actually, let's call it Paver dash Calstone, Sierra, Granite. Something like that. It's Quarry. Anyway, and I'll go ahead and say, OK. You can give it too much information, but whatever. OK, so let me go ahead, and in the diffuse here, I'm going to go ahead and load. It's going to be a text bitmap. And I'm going to load my Calstone Sierra Granite diffuse. There it is. I'll go ahead and say OK. Right? And so if I went ahead and I assigned this to my object, whoops, not my infinite plane. Away. Hold on a second. Oh, it is selected. And let me go back to my material editor. And let me assign my paver. And then I were to render it, of course, I'd have the initial pattern of the pavers, okay, which looks pretty reasonable in terms of what I was after. Obviously, it's laid on a diagonal. I'd have to adjust the texture mapping to get it to not be on the diagonal pattern anymore. But that's fine for right now. So let's go ahead and let's load in the bump map. Text bitmap. It was this one. And we'll start with a value of 1, and we'll go ahead and take a render of it and have a look. All right, so we're getting good texture on these. Again, it depends on the scale. We'd have to make those adjustments. But part of the reason I'm spending so much time talking about this is now in the future you'll know where to make these adjustments. Oh, it looks like fur instead of what I was trying to go for. You can make that adjustment. OK, so that's now done. We're going to come in and we're going to turn on the displacement map. And I'm going to pick the text bitmap that represents my displacement map. We'll go ahead and say OK. The value here is not going to be 1. It's going to be less than that. I'll do it at 0.25 because it does have some grout to it. I have no idea whether this is going to work or not, but we're going to give it a shot. Okay, so now I have those adjusted. And let's go ahead and try this render again. I also could be backwards. I could have popped the wrong direction. Yep, I got it right. I can see right there on the edge that I got it right with those little gaps. Okay? So essentially, I was able to create a texture completely from scratch from something that was an existing object. Right? So I picked a cowstone paver because I knew it would have a pattern. I knew I could get the example file there. But now I can use this as one of the elements in a particular scene when I'm doing a rendering. And the more time I spend on getting the material right, the easier it is to be able to use it down the road. Okay? So now that this is done and I'm happy with it, right, assuming I like the settings, I'd go ahead and go into my material editor. There's my cowstone. I'm going to go ahead and pack the material. And what packing the material does, which you've done before, and I'm going to go ahead and put it into my resources folder under paving, under landscape, paving materials. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and save it right here as a zip archive. But what it does is it goes and collects the individual map files that I'm using, the diffuse, the bump, the displacement, puts them all in one place so that I have it. Then I'm going to go back and render this so that I can see a good preview of it. Let me go back to set view, render material test, which centers everything and gets it ready for me. I'll go ahead and do a full rendering of this. Again, already set up for you, so you don't have to do anything specific in the Rhino modeling side. You can concentrate on the materials. All right, there it is. I'm going to go ahead and save this as well. We'll save it to the same place. Oh, I saved it to the materials folder, didn't I? And it was under landscape, paving. And I'm going to go ahead and save this. This is the pavers, cowstone, Sierra granite, right? Not the zip file. And I'll go ahead and click, this is a sample. And I'll go ahead and click save. There we go. And so now I'm going to go to the course website, and I'm going to post this. You guys will do this 4 times today. I'm going to create a new post, so 4 separate posts today. Unless you're 135 graduates, in which you're going to do as many as you can, but it might take you longer. So I'm not going to be overly concerned with the exact number you get, but if you're creating them from scratch, you get to do fewer. If you're borrowing from somebody else, then you get to do more. But the point is to get comfortable with it. Okay, so this is the pavers, cowstone, Sierra granite, and it's the quarry stone. And I'm going to upload the zip file. So I'm going to add media, upload files, and find the zip file, which is under my resources, V-Ray, and landscape, paving materials. There it is. Click open. Insert into post so that I have the zip file. I'm going to set my featured image as the render. There we go. And then I want to make sure that I go to the V-Ray materials category over here and that I categorize it so that you can, or somebody else could find it later. So this is under landscape, and it would be a paving material. I guess it would be on the ground. Right. Shockingly, I don't have paving. Let me add paving as a landscape material. And once I have all of those categorized, I'll go ahead and publish my post. And so you guys may have already discovered this, but on the course website, if you go under Resources, there's a category called V-Ray Materials Library, right? And there's a bunch of materials that people have uploaded that you can actually download and use. Any of the ones that have the little Digital Tools logo on it, or ones that I did or I've checked and made sure that they worked correctly and that you can guarantee that they will actually work. But other people are actually, some of these work pretty well and can actually, you can use them without a problem. So anyway, the point being that they exist, and you're more than welcome to use any of them once they exist. Okay? So feel free to use those as additional resources as well. Any questions? I know it's a lot to take in, but if you really understand materials, you get far, far better rendering results.